So in my last video, I showed you how to make a brutalist sci-fi building using a building from my building pack. And then what I did was I just, for the final scene, I duplicated the building a bunch of times, scaled it down, all this kind of stuff. I basically kit bashed the building into other buildings and other forms and things like that. And I think it turned out really, really well, especially considering the angle that I rendered it from, everything. I kind of made it look like every building was unique, even though it was the same building. And something I mentioned in the tutorial was that if you make each side of the building a little bit different, you can essentially get 4 buildings out of that one because you can use 4 different angles. One thing I didn't really work on, and I actually made a mistake in the beginning, was I deleted a lot of this rooftop structure and then flattened everything out. And I realized that skyscrapers, at least the ones that I've made, like the buildings that I've made, and it's something I proved upon in my second version, was that I started to add these rooftop structures. And I realized that, oh, that is something that almost all buildings have. It's just that we don't really see them from that angle. So I'm here in Google Earth in New York, and you can see that every building, at the top of every building, there's some stuff. You know, we usually see buildings from below because that's just what we're able to get as like humans walking around. And they really look really good from that angle. Most skyscrapers are designed, I think, to kind of hide all of the workings and all the industrial looking things that keep the building running up top. They just kind of shove that at the top, kind of like your friends are coming over, so you just throw everything in the closet and make your house look nice and pretty. But really, that stuff is somewhere, and that's usually for buildings, it's on the rooftop. And so I'm just kind of flying around here and looking around, and like I'm noticing the if you look kind of at the building flat like this, they extend the walls of the building around the top. I mean, it's also probably so stuff doesn't fall off, but even if you're kind of getting a low angle, you don't really see, like if you looked at it from here, you wouldn't really see the stuff on top, and it looks nice and clean and architecture and all this kind of good stuff. But if you're going to be doing renders kind of like the one I did in my last video, these top-down views, which I think are really worthwhile renders to do because they're very moody, they're atmospheric. And if you're going to be doing like cyberpunk cityscapes and you're going to be doing these massive towers and you're looking down at the neon streets below, you're going to want to have the buildings in your scene have some rooftop structure. As a reference, as an artistic reference, you start to get a good idea of like the type of things you will usually find on a rooftop. So you're almost always going to have a couple of these giant vent looking things, these HVAC units, maybe a water tower or two, maybe a little like generator room or something for like a maintenance room, a tower, a bunch of structure around the sides. Sometimes you'll see stuff like this, like little exhausts and vents. I'm not really sure all the correct terminology, but this is the kind of classic stuff you would see on a rooftop. And I think the scale of rooftop stuff is also important. You know, buildings are pretty massive, like obviously, but something to keep in mind when you're making your cityscapes, and if you're going for realism or if you're just going for impact, like if you want buildings to seem gigantic, having stuff on top of the buildings, having things around the buildings, like rooftop stuff like this, it really can sell the scale, and sometimes like it can make your renders feel a bit more compelling. One thing that I was kind of curious by is like sometimes you'll notice or like sometimes you'll see renders or pictures of like little rooftop gardens or something interesting going on the roof, and you're like, huh, there's like this grass here and there's trees and there's like patio furniture. Where's all the generator stuff? And I mean, it's there, it's just kind of on the other side of the building, or it's above, it's hidden. So if you wanted to do a render, let's say from a shot like this, something dramatic, you're gonna see the tops of a lot of buildings, especially the buildings near you. I think this is also why in most renders you might not ever see the tops of buildings, even if you're on the roof of another building looking down at the street and all of this like bustling activity. People will still just like take this building, for example, extend it all the way up, extend all these buildings up so that so that you feel like you're in between buildings, you're not really above buildings. Anyway, that's kind of a long way for me to get into the topic for this video. When I was looking for my own personal photos that I might have taken of rooftop buildings, of course, like I don't have a lot. I don't have anything really good or anything at a good angle that I can use. So I was considering either looking at Google Earth for reference, or I could just like go to AI, because that's something that I personally feel AI is like perfect to be used for as a tool. So I went to Midjourney and I just put in like isometric rooftop structures and things like that. And I think I got some really, really good results, especially like right off the bat. I got pretty lucky. So immediately something like this, like these two, I could use. You know, this is a fairly flat perspective and I can just do some like classic projection, UV projection to get these. And then I just got more variety of things. And what's perfect about using something like AI for this is that it doesn't have to really make sense. Because if you go back to Google, like you can see that this stuff is not really in focus, but when you're zoomed out, it really adds to this sense of like busyness to your scene and to the city and adds a sense of realism. You know, as long as we kind of get the basic geometry of everything and we get a texture that looks like something, I think that will really go a long way for us. Even more so if you're going to be making these gigantic mega structures and you have a lot of surfaces at the top of your buildings, you're going to want to populate that with as many like just greebles of HVAC units and vents and all kinds of things like that. So I tried to get a good mix of like boxes, very basic shapes, very low poly stuff. These are all just going to be boxes and the texture is going to do a lot of the heavy lifting. So I try to just go for like variety, try to get different types of vents and different types of surfaces, very, very simple geometric shapes that I'm going to use. I think we have enough at least to work with here. And again, like these don't have to be really high res. The more low res, the better, I think. And the more simpler, the better. So it's just, you know, we're just using this as filler content. It doesn't need to be hyper accurate. Unless you are going for something that's a little bit more accurate, then I would recommend like actually modeling this stuff and looking at real world reference. But I think for us right now, this is perfect. So I'm going to bring all of this into Blender and then we'll just start seeing what we can make out of it. All right, so I'm gonna start kind of blocking out the basic shapes. And the way I'm gonna do that is I just kind of split up all 4 quadrants into individual pieces. And I think this one is the one that I like the most. I'm gonna use this. There's a bit of perspective here and I think we can kind of work with that as long as we can kind of get it close enough. So I'm gonna make a new shape. And because this is kind of blocking it and I need to be in texture view to see it, I'm gonna turn this into wire. So I'm gonna go in here into the object properties and I think change this to wire. Yeah. So then I can try to at least match the perspective. For example, like keep my view locked here like this. I can use the cube and I'm going to make it so that I can't accidentally select this one. So I'm going to use this cube and just kind of move around. So I think that's kind of a good angle. I'm going to grab that face, go into X-ray mode, grab that face, bring it out. So I'm going to just adjust I think that's a lot closer. Just going to do that, duplicate it up, and just slowly match the shapes. All right, so I think I got these to a pretty good spot, but when I got out of the view, I noticed that not everything was on ground level. So since this is all part of the same, like geometry, the fastest way I can think of fixing this is to separate everything, at least on the rooftop, and then set all the origins at the bottom and then level them out that way. So I'm going to show you how to do that quickly. So I'm going to select everything like this, hit P to separate by loose parts. So then everything is its own object. And the floor here, I don't have to worry about. I'm going to set the origin to geometry for that. So I'm going to select the floor and then Control I to select all of these objects. I'm going to right click, set origin to geometry. So now the origin for all of these objects is right in the middle. And if I go in a flat view like this, you can see that every object is at different heights. So the best way for me to do this is go up here in the options. I'm in object mode, by the way, and select, I think, locations. So now this means that whatever I do will only impact the location of the object. So if I scale, it will scale the location, if that makes sense. It won't scale the actual object. So if I hit S to scale and then Z and then 0, all the locations get scaled to 0. So now at least I know everything is at the bottom. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to tab into edit mode for all of those objects. Let me select this and then inverse selection, go into wireframe view. I'm going to move everything up so that it's kind of all on the same row like that. So these two, I'm gonna bring them down. I know that this line right here is the bottom, is the origin point of everything. So if I just keep grabbing stuff, kind of highlighting it, and then bring it down. So then I'm gonna level everything out so that the bottoms of every object is where this kind of imaginary line is. All right, so now I think everything, the origin of everything is at the bottom. At least it looks like it. Oh, this one got. So now I'm gonna grab all of this stuff at the top and join it, Control J. And basically where this red line is, where the x-axis line is, that's the flat part of the rooftop. So then I'm just gonna slide everything down on the Z like that. Honestly, they're not perfectly aligned, so I can just let them kind of clip through the floor a little bit. I think that's fine. Yeah, that's basically the fastest way. I know how to solve that problem. If anybody knows a faster way to do that, please let me know. All right, so now we have everything where we need. I'm gonna join everything. And what I shouldn't have done is gone out of the perspective view that I was in when I arranged all this stuff. So I'm gonna set a camera up and then just use that as my reference. So then I can always jump back into the camera. I probably should have done that from the first part, but I'll do it this time. Oh, I think because I centered all of the stuff, it got moved around a bit, but I think this was basically like the point. So I'm gonna lock this camera here. I'm gonna just kind of reposition everything so that's back in the spot that it needs to be. And now I'm going to assign this material to this object. So I'm just gonna select this object, shift select this one, hit Control L, and then link materials. So now this one should have the same material, it's just not applied correctly. So if I hide this and then go into solid view, so it has the material, it's just not projected correctly. So I'm gonna jump into the UV editor and hit U project from view. Then I'll be able to just hopefully select this one down at the bottom. It looks like everything kind of like lines up except for the outside here. So it looks like my view is not perfect or is not close enough. It's a little bit more top down, maybe a little bit more zoomed out. Mostly looking at these core shapes and then I'll worry about the rest. So yeah, this process is a little bit tedious, but it's definitely faster than like manually making HVAC units that you're just going to use as like greebles and stuff. So at least this way you kind of get the power of an image texture, you know, helping you with a lot of the details of the geometry that you're not going to make. All right, let's see how that looks. Oops, god damn it. You know, it's not perfect, but we already have what I would imagine is like a pretty good thing we can just throw on top of a building. This looks kind of like the Google Earth equivalent. I don't know, maybe this isn't like a worthwhile method. I'm not really sure yet. It feels like it'd be usable. If it was like here, I think this could work. I think this could be good enough. Let's kind of see it with an HDRI. Something like this. Yeah, I don't know. This could work. Again, we're just looking for something like greeble level type stuff. Again, we kind of have these like little cubes with textures on it, but then we can duplicate them, or we can, you know, do something else with them. We can, if I wanted to, I could take this shape, bring it over here, kind of just add a little bit more detail, add a little bit more stuff going on. And then of course we can always get more detailed. We can do more like insets, things like that. But I think you kind of get the idea. So I'm going to do a couple more of these, and if I have anything really interesting to call out or note, I'll make sure to make a note of that. One thing I just did really quickly was I grabbed the side faces of these vents here, and then I just kind of did a cube projection, which I think kind of puts them all in like this grid. So then I just stack them, and then I found the same spot just on top of one of these. And now that kind of fills in the sides in a way that I think it looks a little bit better from the sides. And I might do that for some of these other ones. One thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to try to get these pipes in here, and I'm going to use a Bezier curve. So I'm going to hit Shift A and add a curve. So I'm going to use this. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here and go into the depth and give it like a very small amount, maybe 0.5. 1. I'm going to go into edit mode for it. I'm going to click off of it, so I don't want to have it selected, and instead I'm going to use this right here. So this is a curve pen, and this will, you can also draw. So if I select draw and then select surface, and that's actually a little bit too much. And this can be good for like if you're doing cables, but I want to use the pen tool because what I'm going to be able to do is, if you've ever used anything like Illustrator, so if you click and drag, you get like this, you see? And then you can kind of work with that. So gonna go all the way around and add these in like that. And you can go back in afterwards and just like make adjustments to things if you need to. But I think it's overall, it's just a really good way to get some of that geometry in quick. So I'm gonna do this for the rest of them, and I'll be right back. All right, so I think I got them all to a good spot. Just kind of like made a bunch of them, spread them out. Sometimes the ends can get a little twisted, so just make sure you untwist those. Okay, yeah, it looks pretty good to me. Just kind of roughly, some of them are going through, and you know, just enough to get the idea. So now I'm gonna apply that material to it. That's the only one that I have. Oh, I gotta convert them to a mesh. So before I do that, I am gonna just go into the resolution preview, and originally I think it was I set to 12, which I think is kind of high for what we're trying to do. So something like 6 or even like 4, I think is gonna be good. So 3D, sometimes these corners get pinched, but it looks like at 2D, it handles them a lot better. So I'm gonna go back into the top view, have them all selected. I'm gonna hit, you can either go up here to object and then convert, or you can, if you're using Windows, you can hit F3 on the top of the keyboard. So F3 will open up this like search operator view. And you can type in really anything, modifiers, anything like that. So I'm gonna type in mesh, and then automatically here, convert to mesh. So now this is a mesh. So if I tap into edit mode, you can see that's what it is. And I think there's still a little bit too many faces. So I'm gonna just try to see if I can like decimate it. So I'm gonna select all of this for now, neatly unwrapped, but we're gonna destroy that soon. Gonna do a project from view, I think is gonna get us what we want. Where is it? There we go, project from view, and then just align it up. Yeah. So I think that's pretty good. Just a little bit more depth again. Let's jump back into cycles. You can see how that looks. Yeah, that really goes a long way. I'm gonna see if I can decimate it, just to really bring down the poly count of that, something like that. So it's 2,400. That brings it down to 900. I think that's pretty good. Planar really brings it down a lot too. So that seems to get rid of all those like little loop cuts that were in some of these longer areas. That might be what I'm gonna use. Yeah, because subdivide, it does this, which I don't like. It kind of does something weird with the corners. But going to planar, that kind of gets rid of all of the extra loop cuts that I really didn't want. Let's see how that looks. Still looks good because again, the texture is really doing a lot of the heavy lifting. But yeah, so this whole thing is really not a ton of geo, which is going to be the goal. Pretty low poly, but we have a lot to work with now. And really, I think the pipes here do add a bit of depth. So it adds a little bit of that low drop shadow underneath everything and just makes it look a little bit more three-dimensional. But yeah, so I hope this demo gave you a good idea of how I made this asset, and I'm gonna just make a good amount, and that way it will be a nice variety pack. All right, so I ended up making about 4 different ones, and these 4 are from one image. Like, you know how Midjourney gives you 4 results at once? I just used that same single texture. So this is all using one texture, which is perfect. Yeah, I think it turned out pretty good. I actually timed myself for one of them. It took me about 40 minutes to do a single one. So hopefully I can speed that up a bit more so that I can do more of them. But also, you know, it's just kind of one of those chill, tedious things that, you know, you're not going to be able to speed through. And I learned a little bit more, you know, like when you work under certain constraints, you will sometimes try new tools and experiment. So I learned that you can draw cables that look smooth or draw cables that look really raggedy and kind of like bumpy and knotted and stuff like that. There's a nice range of bigger, thicker cables that are just kind of laying there, and then thinner cables. I'm mostly concerned about with lighting, what's visible, what's not visible. So I try to use this HDRI, that kind of shows you a little bit of how much depth there is to some of the geometry. So again, if you look really close, it doesn't really hold up as well, but from a distance, I think it looks pretty good. And then over here on the texture side, the material, you can see what I have is I have the main image here going into the base color. I have the metallic turned up, and then I have the same image going into a color ramp, turning it black and white into the roughness. So I was kind of playing around with adding a bit more to the material instead of just having it be an image. So here, if I kind of bring back the white and bring up the gray, you can see that the lighter areas, they kind of get a little bit of like this shininess. So, you know, this is also passable for if you want to make it a wet city, like a rainy kind of city. So I feel like, you know, you get some pretty good results here, and it still looks, it looks a little bit shiny. It also looks a little bit dusty and old. So I think it works in both ways, especially for this one right here. This looks more metallic and kind of has a little bit more personality. And then I did the thing where you take the image and plug it into a color ramp and then a bump node. I'm not really sure how I feel about that. The bump node thing doesn't usually work unless the image has a high bit depth, and these do not. So you can start to see some like JPEG artifacting. So if I just mute that, it goes away, but it does add a bit of like grunge and a little bit of dirt around the edges. So lastly, I just wanted to see how it looked, like how it looked on the building. So this is my current rooftop kind of assembly on my second building pack. Now that I look at this, the scale is way off. There's like rooftop stuff for the sake of something being there, but it doesn't really make a ton of sense and it's not that interesting. So I took these and then made them into assets for the asset browser, and then just drag and drop them. So you can just drag and drop them into your scene like this. And I put that on the same building to see how that looks. And here's the result. So I think this looks a lot better. On this one, this is another building, but I just added 5 of these. So I scaled them down just to see how it looks when they're smaller. So I think they work at this scale. I feel like it might be a little bit too big. I look at the windows, you know, like the windows are probably the size of like one person. So then if you think about a person out here, these cables would be like gigantic. Maybe this is like a medium believability, and this is more of like an accurate believability, maybe. I'm not sure. Like this looks really good from here. Yeah, so I put all 5 of them up here, and then if you grab them, you see like how the floor kind of doesn't match the rest of the building. So let's say you want just the stuff on top and you don't really want like the platform that it's on. I'm grabbing all of them and I'm moving them down until the floors kind of clip through that material like that. And now you kind of get a little bit more of a natural look to all of this stuff up here. So I think there's room to kind of experiment here and room to play. I'm definitely going to keep making these assets and just keep working on them. So I'm going to release these for now, like kind of like an early release, but eventually I hope to make more. And at that point, I'll like update the pack or just release a new one. I guess just consider this kind of like an early release. But yeah, if you have the building pack, which you should, it's on the Patreon, and now you're gonna have some sick rooftops. Throw these in your scene, see how it works for you, and yeah, just let me know in the comments if you have any feedback, if something works, something doesn't work. Cool. All right, see ya.